Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
A couple people, including Tequila, sent me a story where the headline looks like clickbait. But technically speaking, it is word for word true. Wisconsin man sentenced for hiding Dukes of Hazzard General Lee replica. The man has a Dukes of Hazzard General Lee replica. He hid it, and now he's being punished for it. Question is, how does that run you afoul of the law to hide your Dukes of Hazzard General Lee? In case you don't know, the Dukes of Hazzard was a TV show that ran back from 1979 to 1985 on American television. And it starred a couple of people running around doing crazy stuff, and they were often doing those things in a car, which was a 1969 Dodge Charger for the most part. Believe it or not, in later seasons, they used some other cars that looked a lot like it, but generally speaking, they said the car was a 1969 Dodge Charger. And for those of you who don't know, this car right here is a Dodge Charger Daytona from 1969. So if you remove the wing and the nose cone, it would be a 69 Dodge Charger, similar to the General Lee. But the General Lee was painted orange and had a Confederate flag on the roof. It had a weird push bar in the front. And for some odd reason, the Duke boys had to run to the car and slide over the hood and then jump in through the windows, because apparently that's what you do with a car down south there in Hazzard County. So Nick Viviani wrote this for NBC15.com, which is WMTV. WMTV. It's bright orange, weighs more than 1.5 tons, and has a giant 01 painted on each side. Still, a man from Wisconsin tried hiding it after declaring bankruptcy, according to federal prosecutors. So the man declared bankruptcy, and if you go through bankruptcy, you basically throw yourself at the mercy of the court and you say, look, I'm here, I've got people who say I owe them money, I haven't got enough money to pay them, and it's so dire that if I don't get protection from you, it's going to ruin me. And the bankruptcy court will look at it and go, okay, fine, what are your assets? And so you have to be truthful and tell them what your assets are. And so you tell them what your assets are, and then they look at the debts that you have, and they try to resolve these things peacefully. And it turns out that the man had a Dukes of Hazzard General Lee replica, which apparently he wanted to hang on to and didn't want to jeopardize his ownership of it by letting the court know that it existed. So according to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the man was sentenced recently for lying to the U.S. bankruptcy trustee about his replica of the General Lee, which of course they say is a 1969 Dodge Charger made famous in the Dukes of Hazzard. The man's 57 years old. He's also accused of hiding a 1979 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am, which would have been close, but not quite the same as the Trans Am in Smokey and the Bandit 2. Although the statement from the AG's office did not make the movie connection or indicate if the car was black. So he had a Trans Am also, which people are speculating may have been due to his connection to liking movies and cars. The judge sentenced the man to 3 years of probation, fined him $1,000, and called it a just sentence because of the defendant's health and financial circumstances. But then again, pretty much everybody in front of this bankruptcy judge has financial problems, I would think. The judge also added he would consider prison in cases such as this as a warning to other people who would consider trying to conceal assets after declaring bankruptcy. U.S. Attorney Timothy O'Shea said it did not take long for investigators to realize the man was hiding the cars. He noted that after seizing them, the vehicles were sold off. So that was the man's fear, is that would happen, and it did happen. And, you know, you'll see these cars popping up from time to time, the Dukes of Hazzard General Lee replicas. And I was never a big fan of the show, but ironically, in the summer of 1979, I bought my first car. It was a 1969 Dodge Charger. But I didn't buy it because of the Dukes of Hazzard. I bought it because, number one, I like Mopars. Number two, I got a great deal on it. I got the car for $300, and it had a 383, and it was a great first car for a kid in Michigan. And I drove that thing for a few years, put tons of miles on it. Eventually, I sold it for $300. But I remember when I did own it, I remember people saying, Steve, you should paint it orange. You should paint it orange. And I'm like, not really. And if you watch the Dukes of Hazzard today, it's kind of hard to imagine that it was aimed at adults. I I don't really quite know that it was. I know a lot of kids liked watching it. But I do think that when they made it, they originally thought, well, this will kind of appeal to all ages, right? But it's kind of like watching Gilligan's Island now. You look at it and go, wow, this is on primetime? Really? No, it was. So Dukes of Hazzard ran from 79 to 85. And they were just a couple good old country boys. And they were running that moonshine down there. And they needed that 69 Dodge Charger to do it. And for some odd reason, they also did a lot of fighting with bows and arrows. I know there's all kinds of backstories to all of this. I'm not going to get into it now. But I actually did once write an article, I believe for roadandtrack.com, but I'm not sure who. Just factoids about the General Lee. And I uncovered a lot of these when I wrote my book about the wing cars. And I wrote a book about those wing cars, the Dodge Daytona and the Plymouth Superbird. And, of course, anytime you start talking about cars from that era, you wind up running across all kinds of stuff about the Dukes of Hazzard. And so in that show, they had several different vehicles they used on camera. And they had one they used for close-ups, but they would invariably wreck one or two cars per episode. And the cars, however, were magical because they'd wreck a car and 10 seconds later it's driving down the road completely unwrecked. And so what they were doing, of course, was they were creating more and more and more and more, like basically stunt cars that would get damaged. And if they could fix them, they'd pound it out and use it again. If they couldn't, they would just scrap it. And they wound up scrapping a ridiculous number of 1969 Dodge Chargers. Now, the production numbers in that car were quite high. They built quite a few of those. But sadly, a lot of them got destroyed by the makers of this show. And so if you watch extremely carefully, the last season of that show, you'll see that some of the cars they're smashing are not even Dodge Chargers. But I can also tell you one of my favorite factoids of that show is that there's a famous scene in the opening credits of the General Lee flying through the air, just flying through the air, almost like a bird. And the problem to get that shot was that if you take a car like that, that's nose heavy, and you launch it into the air, it doesn't fly like an eagle or like a football thrown perfectly. What it does, it goes up and that heavy front end tips it. And then it starts doing this, and it doesn't look quite as good, especially if you're trying to pretend there's people in there. So to get that shot, they filled the trunk with cement. They put bags of cement in the trunk to counterbalance the engine. And then they got the cameras nice and low and launched the car up here. And yeah, trust me, when you take a 69 Dodge Charger with a trunk load of cement, it's not going to fly really far, but it flew far enough to catch that on film. You put it in slow motion, you shoot it just right, and it looks like that thing could fly all day. So it's a crazy story. But like I said, I've seen these cars pop up at car shows and so on. I'm not sure if I've ever actually seen a real one that was actually on the show. I know those are out there also. But, to me, I just look at it and go, to me, it's a symbol of all the cars they wrecked for that TV show. And like I said, summer of 1979, I bought a Dodge Charger 69, and I loved that vehicle, drove it forever. And mine was actually a 69 Charger SE, the special edition. It had power windows, leather seats, had AC, which I never used, and an AM/FM radio, but I actually got a Pioneer Super Tuner. And there's a few guys out there who know what that is. So I had a Pioneer Super Tuner in that car, and I'd drive around listening to WABX, WRIF, and W4 back in those days. So Wisconsin man sentenced for hiding Dukes of Hazzard General Lee replica. And if you own one, you're allowed to hide it unless you filed for bankruptcy and you claim that you've disclosed all your assets and you failed to disclose the existence of your Dukes of Hazzard General Lee replica. So that's from NBC15.com, WMTV, and Tequila sent it. Thanks a lot. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. I used to be disgusted. Now I try to be amused.